I'm Laura. I'm the senior science writer at NCAR, a former newspaper reporter, and also former science writer at the University of Colorado. And I'm here to talk to you about getting your research covered in the news. So I have heard from a lot of scientists over the years their concerns. The chief one seems to be being misquoted. And there are valid concerns, but I am here to convince you that there are some really good things about doing media. And one of the best ones, or most important to you, might be that it's possible that media coverage increases your citations. So I only found 3 studies that address this, but all of them found an increase in citations. The most recent was a 2013 study that found that coverage in British newspapers increased. The studies that were covered had 63% more citations. But only one study gets to this question of, does the media coverage actually increase the citations, or does the media only cover studies that would have a lot of citations? But there is one study. It's from 1991, and it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It found that studies published in the New York Times got 73% more citations than the control group. And the control group was studies that would have been covered in the New York Times, but weren't because of the 1978 strike. And they know they would have been because they created a newspaper of record that they didn't distribute, but they knew what would have been published. And this is the New York mayor reading the Washington Post during that strike. But if citations don't convince you, there's also evidence that it has a positive impact on a scientist's career. The journal Science did a survey of epidemiologists and stem cell researchers and to ask them how they thought media contacts might have impacted their career. And most of them said it was either positive, it was balanced, or it was neutral, and hardly anybody said mostly negative, which is great news. And the people that did say mostly negative, that's the little white bars up there. So hardly anything, nothing to fear. Also, we hear from our own scientists that news coverage can lead to more connections, more partnerships with potential collaborators and funders. One example of this is a recent news release we did on sun forecasts, which is a solar energy forecasting system. And after it went out, several big utilities contacted NCAR and said, we'd like to be a part of that. How do we use that? So now that you are all convinced that you want your research covered by the media, I want to give you a few tips how to know when your research is newsworthy, starring some NCAR research as examples. So probably the first most important category is if your research impacts people's day-to-day lives, if it touches people. Here's an example of NCAR Communication research that led to the National Weather Service redoing their icons to make them easier to read, easier to tell when there's a warning or a watch or an advisory. I also put a lot of climate change findings into this category because it's how your day-to-day life will be impacted in the future or already has been. These are 2 studies we did releases on the future of summertime heat and also on how the Southwest has already begun drying. Increased better predictions also impact people's day-to-day lives, and here's an example of 2 NCAR studies that help predict heat waves weeks in advance. One using sea surface temperature anomalies on the left there, and one using a pattern of atmospheric waves high above the atmosphere, so that's all newsworthy. Your research is also definitely newsworthy if it touches on current events. So in research we had about Zika, looking at Zika risk in 50 US cities is exceptionally newsworthy. And more recently we used Hurricane Matthew as a hook to talk about our MPAS model, which was doing experimental simulations of where Matthew might go. And this leads right into the next slide, which is that if you have great visuals, that can be newsworthy on its own. This next slide is a couple of scientific studies that were very difficult to understand, but the visuals carried the day and they still got great coverage. One is simulated gravity waves on the left, and the other is a super resolution solar model. Your research may also be newsworthy if there's oh wow findings that are surprising, counterintuitive, if they're just weird, the kind of thing you would talk about at a barbecue. This is a study showing massive rains in Australia actually caused a drop in global sea levels, so that's kind of an oh wow. Your research may be newsworthy if it's about something that's the biggest, the fastest, the newest, the greatest, the most superlative, and this is a supercomputer, so obviously Cheyenne is newsworthy. It's our next newest, biggest supercomputer. Research is newsworthy if it can address and solve a long-term mystery. And so there's the mystery of why is Antarctic sea ice extent growing even though the climate is warming? And this was about a study that showed that that can be connected to natural variability in the interdecadal Pacific Oscillation, so that was newsworthy. And finally, research is newsworthy if it represents the major breakthrough in your field. And this doesn't have to be something you understand, but sometimes The enthusiasm carries the day, and in this case, our scientists observed alphin waves, which I may not be saying correctly, which come from the sun, and that was also newsworthy. So that's the end. If you think you have newsworthy research, I encourage you to contact your communications office or me if you work here.